Before I get started, I like to get a sense of who's in the audience. So how many of you, this is your very first tech conference ever? Raise your hand. First tech conference ever? Amazing. I have good news and I have bad news. So the good news is that you picked an amazing experience for your first tech conference. The bad news is that it's hard to follow an NDC event because of the food and the staging and hopefully the speakers. And I almost think of it like if someone takes you on a first date to a Beyonce conference or a concert or a Taylor Swift concert, and then how do you follow that up? So I would encourage all of you to not make this your last tech conference, but know that like they're not always as good as NDC. You can go to lots of NDC conferences though. They're all over the world. They're Porto, Oslo, Sydney, all over the world. So I think that you will not go wrong if you do a lot of NDC events. I also want to ask a few questions about the experience levels of the folks in this room. How many of you are in your first year as a software developer or in software? All right, we have one person. How many of you are in the first 3 years? A few people. How many of you are managers? A couple of managers. How many of you tried being a manager, you hated it and stopped doing it? Yes, I have been there too. I should say I almost was there. I have at many points in over 25 years thought, why do I keep doing this to myself? Management is so hard, so difficult, so I've kept at it and I've stayed, but I will say that a lot of companies are coming around to the idea of a pendulum. In fact, Charity Majors, who was here yesterday, talked about the concept of giving people the opportunity to try on the manager role. I go from an IC to a manager, see what it's like, give it a year, and then if you don't like it, with like no punishment at all, go back to just writing code for a living. And I really hope that if you are curious about being a manager, that your company or org supports that, because it's a powerful way to get better managers, is to make it not a one-way door to hell, but that you can go back if you want. So I have been a manager for a long time. I've been in software development for a very long time. In fact, when I started my career, I started at Accenture, which is a very large company that I'm sure most of you have heard about. I've worked at Deloitte, and I'm now at GitHub. But along the way, there's been a number of companies in between. And so while Accenture and Deloitte and Infosys were really the large consulting company models, I really learned a lot from the smaller companies like OnCenter, Assemble, Questback, companies that you probably haven't heard about, and I'm currently here at GitHub. And one thing that I've learned over working at that many companies over 25 plus years is that my style is very much using the big thinking of large companies, but with the roll up your sleeves and get things done of startups. And I really use that to inform my style for running Eng teams. And I've learned a lot of lessons over this more than quarter century in software. And most of those lessons, I have to say, I learned the hard way, I learned the painful way, and I wrote this talk because I want all of you who are in year 1, year 12, year 20 to hopefully learn these lessons in a kinder and gentler way than I did. And I really wrote this talk as a way of saying, what would I tell myself if I could go back in time and teach what I know now to that younger version of myself? How can I make myself more backwards compatible with the lessons and the knowledge that I have now? And that's what I want to help you all also leverage, which is how can you have your career in tech be a lot more pleasant, a lot more effective than what I went through. And the key thing I want you all to take away, if you don't hear anything else that I say today, is that your career is not something that just happens to you. You have agency. You can set your own goals for your career and guide it towards those goals. And that's something that I think I just did not learn early enough. I learned this maybe like 5 years ago, that wait a minute, I can have control over my career and drive it where I want it to go, and you can too. Now, I also want to frame this talk in terms of like, I want to talk about the things that people often don't say out loud. There are certain unspoken rules of working in software development that a lot of people don't say, but you have to come to understand their experience, especially when it comes to being a manager. So I want to share those things too. And so I want to share these lessons, and I'm doing it based on stages. I'm going to go through the stages of my career, go through the biggest aha moments at those stages, and share with you some of the lessons and mitigation strategies that I learned throughout my career. I also want to share some of the cool ideas that I've been able to do at large tech companies, or large and small, because I want to have these ideas spread. Now, before I dive into the meat of my presentation, I have to give a few caveats. One, my experience may not be exactly like your experience. Everyone's journey in software development is going to be different. Most of you who have colleagues who you talk to who are also in tech, you probably have seen this, that the things that you're going through are different. But I do think that there are certain what I call canon events in everyone's career, from the first job, the first promotion, the first bad experience that everyone goes through. And I think that I can draw a thread through those canon events that yield lessons that apply to everyone, no matter where you are. Also, I'm going to tell several stories from my experience. For obvious reasons, I'm going to obscure the identities of the people involved. So names have been changed to protect the guilty. So let's go ahead and dive in. So let's go to the beginning of a career in software development. In fact, let's go to before the beginning of a career and talk about getting hired. Now, some of you, I would imagine, if not all of you, have been through the hiring process. You've gotten your first job. A few of you raise your hand. But if you haven't, I want to share a few things about my experience getting my first job at Accenture back in 1997. Like a lot of you, I did a lot of preparation. I did mock interviews. I read technical books to get ready. I asked my friends who worked at Accenture, what's the hiring process like? And I did my best to be totally prepared for getting that job. But there's something that I've learned now, and that's only after interviewing, being the interviewer of hundreds of engineers for jobs that I did not know back then. And that's, you have about 5 minutes to convince the person who is interviewing you that you're fit for the job. And I know that's not fair, because a lot of people think, well, I have like 45 minutes, maybe an hour for that interview. But most hiring managers, we have a really good idea of who we want to hire. And more than likely, you're not competing against the job description. You're competing against all the other people who came before you. So I've been on hiring loops where I'm talking to person number 3, number 4, number 5. But like person 2 really wowed me, and really you're trying to beat that person. That's something we don't say out loud, but you have a very short period of time to convince the hiring manager that you are the right person for the job. Because we're humans, we naturally try to optimize. And there are a few things that you can do, though, to kind of mitigate this factor. One is just the simple things that your mother or your father or someone who raised you said, and that's be on time. You would be amazed at how many people are late to interviews. It's ridiculous, even virtual ones, where all you have to do is literally log on to Zoom or to Teams or whatever you're using. And so the simple practice of just being on time will at least remove something against you. I also give people the advice, and again, I wish that I had this advice when I was 22 years old, trying to get that first tech job, is be concise. Because I've had multiple times where, as the hiring manager, I have a list of like 10 to 12 questions that I'm trying to get through, and I ask the first question, and the candidate spends 10 minutes answering that first question. Don't do that. You want to give a good answer. You should have probably good answers rehearsed and ready to go, but you can speak for maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and then say, do you have more questions, or I can go into more detail? Because you want to give the hiring manager the opportunity to help time box the interview, because you don't know how many questions they have. As the hiring manager, I know. So you want to do your part to make sure that you're helping to guide the interview. Good hiring managers are going to mind the clock, but you can also be a part of that process, which gives the hiring manager a really good view of how you work together at work. And I'm going to say this a lot over the course of this presentation. When you're talking about your experience and your background, focus on impact, not activity. So many times when I've been the hiring manager for a job, whether that's at GitHub or Accenture, a lot of people, when I ask them a question about, tell me about your first project, tell me about what you're working on now, they give me activity. They describe the team that they're working on, they describe the tech stack, they describe some of the milestones, but that's activity. That's not impact. Activity is good, but impact is what we're looking for. We're looking for what did you do to improve the development process? What did you do to make contributions to the way that code reviews are conducted? What impact did you have on your team, on your customers, and on the company? Don't talk about activities, or don't just talk about activities. It's really important for you to give a sense of the impact that you had on your teams, because I know at GitHub, we hire people to have an impact, not just to do tasks. I will also say that one thing I'm seeing in the industry is that companies are beginning to publish the interview questions online. And when I was at Help Scout, this is something that I really pushed for, because like most companies at Help Scout when I was there, we have standard interview questions that we ask for the initial interview, for the technical screen, for the other parts of the process. And before I got there, these questions were very much inside the company, meaning that you did not know what the questions were going to be until you actually were going through the interview process. And again, this is fine, this works okay, but one thing that I realized is that a number of people who came to interview at Help Scout were not native English speakers. And so our questions were all in English. But if you have someone who speaks French or Greek or Italian, and English is a second or third language, it's really unfair to them to have the questions in English hidden away. Because what happens is that often when I, who speak English, ask the question in English, that person has to hear the question in English, translate it mentally into their native tongue, think about an answer, and then translate that answer back. And I felt that this kind of hiding away of the interview questions was something that was unfair. I also thought about people who are like me, where I need processing time. If you give me a question in advance, I will give you a really good, thoughtful answer. If you spring it on me in an interview where I'm already nervous, I'm not going to give as good of an answer. So I felt that putting the questions in public was a way to be more fair. You gave non-native speakers of English the opportunity to read the questions in advance, and you gave people who just need time to process the opportunity to do that processing. Because I've seen multiple times where you had candidates, and one just needs that processing time, and they may be a better candidate, but if you don't give them the questions, they may not pop as much as someone who's more suited to like off-the-cuff answers. So what we did at Help Scout, and I pushed this, was we put our initial screen questions and our technical questions in a public GitHub repo so that anyone can see before the interview what the questions are. And in the email that HR sends, or that recruiting sends, when we schedule the interview, we say the questions that we're going to ask are in this public repo. Now, we don't publish the exact questions that we're going to ask. We publish the whole set, and the interviewers can pick from, probably 3 or 4 of those questions. So you don't know exactly what you're going to be asked, but you get the set of questions. And what I found from doing this is that candidates who actually take the time to read those questions are better prepared. So I'm a big fan of this. I'm a big fan of making your interview questions public. Some people think it's controversial because people think, well, you're going to get canned responses, or people are going to memorize answers. But I don't think that that's a valid concern, because our questions are meant to be phrased in a way that you can't memorize the answers, right? It's not like we're asking technical questions where there's one right answer. Our questions are things like, tell me a time when you had conflict with a fellow team member, or tell me a time when you disagreed with your manager and you were right and your manager was wrong, right? Those are questions that you really can't memorize the answers to. But I bring this up because if you are interviewing at a company where they've published the interview questions, you should read those questions. I have several times worked at a Help Scout where we have the questions posted in that GitHub repo. Someone comes to the interview, and I ask like one of the top 3 questions on the list, and they're like, that's a great question. I'm like, yes, I know it's a great question. I wrote it, and it's been in public. And so they often struggle to answer this very public question that they should have been ready to go with. So I will say that if you are interviewing for a company, you want to see, do they publish the questions in advance? So that's one thing that I want to share with you. The other thing that I wish I would have known getting that first job is that often most hiring managers, when we get done with that slate of questions, what do? We ask the candidate, do you have any questions for me? You should have questions for the interviewer because that shows that you've been thoughtful, that shows that hopefully you've done your research, that you're not just going on some interview loop with multiple companies, but that you've actually prepared yourself for working at this company. So always have questions prepared. You should never say, no, I don't have any questions. And some of the good questions to ask when the hiring manager asks you, do you have any questions, is to ask, tell me about how does this role fit into the strategy of the company? Or you can say, who will I report to? Will I report to you, the person who's asking me these questions, or report to someone else? You can also ask, is this role a backfill for someone who's left, or is it a new team that's being spun up? And those are really good, thoughtful questions. They also give you a lot of insight into what you're walking into if you do get the job. Now, I want to give one more tip. Again, this is for people who are trying to get that first job. You're going through the hiring process, and that is you might get a job offer from the company, right? And so the ultimate goal of a candidate going through interviewing is to get that offer. And one thing that, again, that I did not know early on is that the first offer you get is usually not the final offer. The first offer you get is usually not the final offer because there's a lot of calculations that companies go through when we're coming up with what do we offer this candidate. Like, we like this candidate, the hiring committee likes the candidate, we want this person to work here, but we have to look at what's their skill set, what are we looking for, what part of the country or the world do they work in, because most companies, you pay based on where you live. Some companies pay the same salary no matter where you live, but that's usually very, very few. And so we look at a lot of factors in what we offer. So that first offer is usually a bit of a test to see what you're willing to accept. And again, I did not know this for years. And so what you want to do is see that first offer as an indicator and signal that they're interested, but don't assume that that's the best that you can get. So some of the things that I've done in my career, when you get that first offer, is that you want to test it. You want to say, look, this offer, which is usually a combination of salary, there's maybe a signing bonus. If your company is publicly traded, there might be stock, RSUs, time off, right? So I'm talking total compensation. When you get that total compensation offer, you want to look at it through the lens of what you're looking for. And if one number's off, let's say salary, you can negotiate. You can say, you know what, this salary is a little bit lower than what I was expecting, but can we up the signing bonus? Can we maybe get a limited PTO? And so you want to give that person a package to send back so that they can talk to their boss about the offer, and then what you'll get back is that you'll get a sign of where they can move. So you get the initial offer, you ask for adjustments to the signing bonus or the time off, and they'll say, we can't meet that signing bonus of whatever, $10,000 US. We can do $5,000. So you've gotten information about where there's room to move. So you can begin to negotiate the package. So what I'm trying to get to you, what I'm trying to put forward is that look at the entire offer. Don't just look at the salary, because salary is important, but total compensation is the mindset that you want to have. And I really think that that's an important concept. All right, so you've gotten the job, right? You've done that first year at the company. We're going to the next stage, and you're now at the point of your career where you're doing a lot of studying, because honestly, in software development, if you're from uni, and maybe you study like computer science, none of that really applies to actually building software for a living. So most of the experience and the learning that you're going to have is really on the job. And so you're going through that, right? You're happy, you're making probably more money than you ever made in your career, and you're doing a lot of work to get ready for the entirety of your career. And I want to pause, because those of you who are in that first year, I want to say that like it's hard, right? No matter how great the culture is at the company that you're working at, no matter how masterful the onboarding process is, it is really tough being a first-year engineer at any company. And one of the ideas that I want to share with you all that I pushed at a previous company is a series of letters that we sent to new hires. So it's called Dear New Engineer. And so when someone joined the company on their first day, they got a automated Slack, well, it was automated in the delivery. They got a Slack message from one of the engineering managers that said, "Hey, Michelle, welcome to our company. We're glad you're here. Here are a couple of things that we think you should know by working here." And we would just have each eng manager share some lesson about the culture or about the company. So day one, you might get a Slack message from a eng manager, maybe not the one that you're working for, that says, "At this company, we expect you to make mistakes. We're building software which has built-in complexity, solving hard problems. We expect you to make mistakes, but we also expect you to learn from those mistakes and share those learnings with others," right? That was one of the Dear New Engineer Slack messages. And then once you were there for a week, you got another message. So the eng managers got together. We pre-wrote all these letters so that as you worked at the company, as you just naturally went about your first day, your first week, your first month, you got all these helpful tips from the people who were the managers. And I really love this concept. I really hope that more companies do that, but it was a way to help people become really acclimated to work at the company and to get a lot of those really pro tips, those cheat codes for working at your company. So it's an idea that I love, and I hope that more companies do it. Now, again, going back to their first year, if I could go back and tell myself something that's really critical about that first year at the company, it's this: your work does not speak for itself. For multiple years, when I started, I thought, I write code, right? It's all in the repository. People can see what I'm doing by looking at my PRs or looking at my issues or seeing what I deploy, and that should be enough. And I'm here to tell you that's not enough. Just like a movie theater, you have the marquee where you tell people, here's what's playing at this theater. You need to be very vocal in your career and let your eng manager, let the leadership team above your eng manager know what's playing in your part of the company. What are you bringing to the table? What impact, again, I'm going to go back to that word impact, what impact are you having? You have to speak for your work, because your work won't speak for itself. It has no mouth. You do. You have to let people know the value that you're bringing to the company. And I'm going to tell you, I've been an eng manager for most of my 25 plus years. I've managed multiple teams at multiple companies. I deeply invest in the people who I manage. I still forget things that they've done. I've forgotten major impactful things that they've done. And I'm someone who really pays attention. So I can promise you that no matter who your manager is, he, she, they are not paying full attention to everything that you're doing, because one, most of us have multiple direct reports that we're supporting, not just you. Two, we're operating in environments of lots of complexity. One of the jobs of a manager is to keep all the complexity and a lot of the context abstracted away from the team so that they can focus on the deep work of building code. So it's your job as an individual contributor to make sure that you have the record of your work very, very clear. One of the techniques that I always advise the people who I support to do is create what I call a brag doc or a brag document. And all that it is a Microsoft Word or Google Docs, or put it in Notion, whatever tool that you're using, of what you've done, right? And what impact that work had on the company or on the team. Because if you keep this brag doc, and it should be a living document that you update regularly, you're keeping a log of your background, a log of your achievements, a log of your impact, and that's really powerful when it comes to the mid-year review time or the annual promotion time or the whatever rhythm of the business that you have. I work at GitHub, so I'm going to say if you work at GitHub, it's really easy to do this because Git remembers, and you can go through all of your pull requests and your commits and really cobble together that history. But the point is that even if you're not using GitHub, you need to have a system for chronicling your impact at your company. Again, I did not know this your first year, so all you first-year folks who raise your hand, start that document. Keep a document of what you've done, because the worst thing that you can do is what I did, which is you get to the annual review period where you have to figure out what you've done for 12 months, and you can't remember what you did last week, and you're trying to figure out what you've done. No, keep that living brag document so that when you have to have that talk with your manager about the year, you might have to update the last week or two, but you have that document. That's incredibly powerful. That's an incredibly powerful asset for managing your career. Again, impact. Impact is extremely, extremely important. Most of you work at companies, I would hope, where you have published in a repo or on a website the career ladder, which is like what we expect of software engineer 1s, 2s, senior engineers, staff engineers, whatever the titles you have, and it should clearly identify what is expected at that level. So what you want to do is make sure that at whatever level that you're at, that you're meeting the expectations of that level. So hopefully you all know where that is on the company document, wiki, whatever, but it's really important that you access that career ladder because that's going to be the artifact that you use when talking to your manager about what you've done. It is very easy, I'm going to go into this later, it is very easy to do a lot of work as an engineer that has no relation at all to what the company expects you to do. So what I advise people to do is use the language of the career ladder in your brag doc, right? So if they say that you should create pull requests of a certain type or that you should demonstrate the ability to work with both the front end and the back end, when you write your brag document, you want to document. Here's work that I did that was the front end or that was in the back end, or here's examples of pull requests that I wrote that were detailed and that were correct. You want to make sure that you're using the career ladder to be able to do that. Again, one thing that I did not know early in my career is you're pretty much expected to be at level, right? So let's say you're a senior engineer at the company that you're working at, and the career ladder is going to give you a description of what's expected of a senior. If you're doing that, that's great. If you want to get promoted, that's not enough. The best way to get promoted, and I've seen this at multiple companies, is to show that you're already showing some of that next level performance. So at GitHub, we have senior engineer, and above senior is staff engineer. And so as a senior engineer that wants to be a staff engineer, you want to very early start to show, okay, based on the career ladder of what we expect the staff developers, I'm already doing that, right? I'm working in the monolith. I'm working across teams. I took the lead on this work that was outside the domain of my primary team, right? Whatever it is at your company that they look for at that next level, it's critically important that you begin to show that. And that's something, again, I did not know. But you make it really easy to have promotion conversations if you're already demonstrating the next level performance. And in a lot of ways, I will admit, that's a bit unfair because you're pretty much you're doing unpaid work, right? So if you're doing staff engineer work, you're not getting paid. And I'm going to be very, very transparent that in a lot of ways it's unfair, but it makes the case really easy for the company to show that you're ready for promotion because you're already showing glimmers of next level performance. I want to give you one more tip again about getting promoted. One of the best things that you can do to really shore up your promotion, besides tying it to the ladder, is have people at the level you're going to vouch that you're ready, right? At most companies, this is pretty much transparent, but at a lot of companies, it's not. So again, if you're a senior engineer going for staff, getting 2 or 3 other staff engineers to say, you're ready and this is why, in writing is extremely, extremely powerful. So promotions can be kind of fraught with a lot of hidden complexities. So I'm trying to cut through that to give you very tangible tips that you can use to make your promotion packet defensible and something that will be accepted and approved. All right. Something else that I wish I knew early in my career. How many of you have one-on-ones with your manager? Okay, good. Most people, some don't. If you don't have one-on-ones with your manager, I highly recommend that you talk to your manager and get them established. One-on-ones as a manager are one of the most powerful ways, one of the most effective tools that I have in managing the people that I'm responsible for. I recommend it weekly at least, or start out at least weekly, because a one-on-one is time that your manager, who's probably really busy, that they're gonna take to give you their full attention for however long the one-on-one is. Mine are all 30 minutes, some people do longer, but one-on-ones are critically important early in your career because that's the opportunity that your manager has to give you detailed coaching, detailed readouts of what you're doing well, feedback on what you can get better at. It's really important. And I'm gonna admit, when I started my career in like the 90s or the early aughts, one-on-ones really weren't a thing. Some people did them, some people did not. But the ones who did for me, I really blew them off. And I really regret doing that. So I want people, especially those of you in that first 1 to 3 years, really leverage one-on-ones because they're incredibly important ways to really turbocharge your career. As a manager, one of the things that I really love about one-on-ones is when my directs bring topics and ideas to the one-on-ones because a lot of people, the one-on-ones are basically like a one-person show. Like I join the Zoom call, I have my agenda, or we talk about whatever. But as someone who's reporting to a manager, when you bring things to the conversation, that's so impressive. Because that shows that you respect your manager enough to get their opinion on things, right? You can bring even simple things like, hey, I wrote this PR. Can you take a look at it? Or, I had trouble understanding the annual review process. Can you explain it to me? By bringing questions to the one-on-ones, you're engaging your manager, and engagement results in engagement. If you're engaged in one-on-ones with your managers, assuming they're not a psychopath, then they will give you engagement back. That's just how humans are, right? So I really do recommend that you lean into one-on-ones. That's something I did not do, but I think it's really important. All right, I want to give one more hard truth about this point in your career that, again, I think is really important to understand early on, but I did not. If your manager was approached by their manager and said, I have to cut half the team, so if you have 6 people, I got to get rid of 3. If you have 10, I get rid of 5. Your manager knows who would be cut. I've had these conversations. I've had to make these calls. So the question is, what half are you going to be in, right? And your manager may need to think about it for a day, but most managers with very little thinking, because if we're paying attention, which is our job, we know of my team of 6, if I had to get rid of 3, these are the 3 people that I would get rid of. So you should ask your manager, am I in the bottom half? No, I'm just kidding. Don't ask your manager this. Don't ask your manager this. But I'm here to tell you, your manager knows where you stand if they had to make a hard cut. So what do you do to mitigate this? Well, you have effective one-on-ones. You market yourself. You talk about your brag doc, right? Those are the things that you can do to become more of a person, right? Yes, as an engineer, we hire people to get results. We hire people to deploy features to users that hopefully those users love. But at the end of the day, we're people. And if you humanize yourself to your boss, then you become a harder to cut person, right? Because it's really easy to cut a stranger. It's harder to cut someone that you know. And so I want to give you these tips because there are ways to really solidify your position with your company. All right. So made it past the first year, you're now in the first 2 or 3 years. And so there are certain things that are really critically important to know during these years. One, the work you're doing should be getting bigger, right? That first year, maybe you're not directly working on features, maybe you're just pairing with someone, maybe you're doing very small features. You get into years 2 and 3, you should be getting larger features, maybe medium-sized features, and you should be doing work that's less defined, right? With someone who's starting out, right, we're, as an engineering manager, we're packaging that work, right? We're making it very narrowly scoped, small, easy to digest, we're giving you that. As you make progress at the company or in your career, we're not doing that much hand-holding, right? So you should be able to demonstrate that you can solve this problem, that you know how to structure this work and then get it done. But one of the things that I found that when I look back at year 3 for me, it's really hard to know how much are you valued, right? Does my manager value me? Do my peers value me? Does the leadership team even know that I exist, right? It's really hard to know that early where you stand. But there's one litmus test that I have for determining how much are you valued at your company, how much are the people around you, how much do they value? And that's this. If people give you private information that's not public, that's a good indicator that they respect you, that they value you, right? Again, early in my career, I was always surprised. There would be a reorg, didn't see that coming. Someone's leaving the team, I had no idea. Someone's having a baby, what? Really? Didn't even know that they were even dating people, whatever. So you just had no idea about, and I was always surprised, and I realized that that was an indicator that I'm not doing the relational things, I'm not managing relationships. And again, at work, you're managing relationships, not just lines of code. I'm not doing what I need to do to really get enmeshed and be respected by my peers. So over the years, I've worked on this. I've really tried to lean into building those relationships. And I have to admit, early in my career, I thought, man, all that going to happy hour and getting to know people's kids and all their stupid hobbies, that's just playing politics, right? That's just, I'm not going to play that game. I'm just going to focus on my code, get my PRs done, do great engineering, right? And again, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I've learned that it's not really playing politics, it's working with humans. Humans have lives that we want people to respect. We want to be seen, right? And so by really honestly seeing people, you're connecting with them above the line of the code base, right? And one of the things that I find that it's really important to do to get that trust is that to be able to get trust, you have to give trust. You have to learn to be vulnerable. You have to tell people, you know what, honestly, not having a great day. Someone who I really care about let me know that they're sick, or I didn't sleep very well last night. And by just saying those simple truths about what you're going through, you're just showing that you're human, right? You're showing that, hey, I'm a human being. My title might be senior engineer, distinguished engineer, whatever, still a human being inside here. And by being vulnerable, you'll find that people will be vulnerable back to you. And I've seen this all throughout my career. And when I've been vulnerable, when I've given trust, I find that people tell me things that are very, very sensitive, things that, like, if it was public, it would hurt that person. That's how you know that people trust you, when they tell you something that if you told other people, it would damage the person who told you that, right? I've had people over the years routinely say, I'm leaving the company. I don't have another job lined up. I haven't told anyone else, but I'm telling you that I'm leaving the company. Or stuff like, hey, in a month, we're having layoffs. It's not public, no one else knows. I trust you enough to let you know. That is a powerful measure of, are you being effective in building the human relationships that are essential at any company that's at least staffed by humans, right? And so if you do the things that I just described, then you'll find that you're getting a better view of how well you're valued by the company. All right, so again, you're in that 2 to 3 year time period, and your manager's coming to you and say, hey, you know what, why don't you run the next retrospective? Or, hey, I've noticed that people who join the team often struggle. Do you mind maybe doing onboarding for new people? Or, hey, I need you can you look into our processes for even deployments or things like that? And that kind of work is what is often called glue work. And Tanya Riley, who, if you've never heard of Tanya, she's amazing. Her blog is noidea.dog, noidea.dog, all one word. I highly recommend that you follow Tanya. She came with the idea of glue work, right? The idea that all these things like running retros or being like an onboarding buddy, those are important things, but it's also activity, right? I talked about impact. And you want to be very careful when you're doing glue work. Glue work is really important, right? It's called glue work because it helps the team stick together, right? Whether it's the people in the team or the processes, but glue work often is not rewarded because glue work is not engineering work. So you want to be extremely, extremely careful if you're doing that. Now, as a manager and a former Scrum Master, I've had multiple deputy Scrum Masters that I've worked with, and I've worked with them to do these things. But it's really easy, and I'm going to be honest, women often get stuck with glue work and get penalized often. I see people laughing. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? You've been there, right? And so you're doing like, I'm running the retro, and I'm managing the board, I'm refining the backlog, and you spend months doing that, and then it's promotion time. Hey, I'm ready. And like, well, no, all of these things that we're looking for at the next level, I don't find any evidence for that, right? And so often you get penalized for doing glue work, and so that promotion that you were going for, you realize that I wasted so many hours doing glue work, and I did not do the engineering work that my company's paying me to do, right? So I just want to say that because I just want to be very transparent. Again, I'm saying the things out loud that often aren't said. You want to be very careful with glue work. Now, I want to add in, a good friend of mine, when I gave this presentation, gave me some good feedback. If your manager values glue work and your manager agrees that, okay, if you do this work, when I write your promotion packet, this will be to your benefit, right? And you want to have a very candid and very open conversation before doing the glue work that this is not going to count against you, right? Or that maybe not count against you, but it will count in your favor. Because if your manager agrees that all that work adds to the team, because, hey, I've run agile teams, I've been a Scrum Master, the ceremonies and all that is very important to the team, and it often is very important to the success of the team, but you need your manager to buy into it, right? So you want to have a very clear conversation, use your one-on-ones to say, okay, I'm doing this work, and you should be very clear with your manager, I'm looking for a promotion in the next 12 months. If you want to get promoted and you haven't told your manager, your promotion's at risk, right? Your manager should know you want to be promoted. Now, if anyone in here that wants to be promoted, tell your manager tomorrow or Slack them today. I want to be promoted in the time frame. And what you want to do is be very, very clear that the work that I'm doing, it all has to be aligned with that goal. And if glue work aligns, that's great. But if not, you want to learn that early. And you want your manager to commit that this glue work is going to be valuable and it's going to be in line with the goals you have at your company. And I don't want to put too fine a point on this, but I've seen many people get disillusioned. I've seen people quit companies over this. So it's very important that if you're doing this work, that your manager gives you credit for this work. And again, this is something that I did not know when I needed to know this early in my career. All right, okay, you've gotten that first job, you gotten past your first year, you gotten through years to maybe 3, 4, or 5, you become a manager. Hooray, yay! All right, welcome to my world. I have a lot to say about this, right? I've been a manager for most of my career, and I love being a manager, but I also know that being a manager has its own challenges, right? So here are some of the things that when you first become a manager, no one tells you. Every team is like a box of chocolates. You're never going to know what you're going to get. So often, when you get a new team, and again, I've been a manager at multiple companies, and I've gotten many new teams, no one tells you this person's burned out. No one tells you this person is under-leveled, meaning that they're a senior engineer, we haven't promoted yet, Or this person is actually over-leveled, meaning that they've been able to play the game, and they may have a title, but they're really not at that level. And all these things are things that you usually find out along the way. And so as a manager, you have to understand that people are going to lie to you, at least lies of omission about the team. And so you should definitely ask your manager or the previous manager, if they're around, hey, tell me about this team. You're not going to get the whole story. And I've learned this the hard way so many times. And one of the big things that about this is one of the things that you also won't be told, that you won't understand, is that people change. So many times in my career, the people who gave me problems when I first started managing that team often became like my biggest allies later. So you have to understand that you're going to have a variety of people that you're managing, but if you manage that team for more than 5 months, you're going to see people change, right? Some of your top performers are going to have something happen in their personal life, and they're going to plummet in their performance. Some of the people who are low performers are going to get good therapy, or they're just going to grow up, and they'll become some of your best performers. Being a manager is playing a long game. It's playing a very long game. And a lot of the feedback loops when you're a manager are extremely long, right? When you're writing code, you get immediate feedback. Your tests pass or they don't. The deployment went to production or it didn't, right? As a manager, the things that you're doing now, you may not see the results for months or even years or maybe never. And so you get very little signal as a manager. But it's really important that you lean into it anyway, right? If you're going to be an effective manager, you have to lean into it anyway. So one of the things that I did not really know when I first became a manager is very much, again, around do my directs value me? Do they understand the value that I bring to the team? Do they even know what I do around this company, right? Because a lot of engineers I don't know what managers do. So one of the ways that you can know that your directs respect you is what I just shared before. If your directs bring topics to your one-on-ones, and again, if you're a manager, you should have one-on-ones with your directs. If they bring topics to your one-on-ones, if they initiate conversations, if they ask you for advice, that is the biggest sign that your directs respect you. The people who aren't talking to you, the people who just come to one-on-ones and they just kind of nod their head and don't say anything, you're probably not having the right effect on those managers. So, and I've been there. I've worked with engineers who were staff engineers, felt that they knew everything, didn't even think that they needed managers, felt that managers were basically works of fiction. And by working with them, I eventually began to show them the value that I brought to them. And you can get there, but the signal is, are they coming to you? Are they asking for your advice? Are they asking for your perspective? That's a great signal that your directs respect you. Now let's go about the opposite side. How do you know that your directs don't respect you? Well, one of the big ways is that they go around you and they go to your boss. And so most eng managers report to a director, maybe a VP. And if your directs always talk to your boss, to their skip level, and they bring your boss problems, that's a big sign of disrespect, right? Now, if you've done the work of managing relationships and doing the things that we've talked about, then your boss is going to redirect that person back to you, right? But if you see that happening, then you have a lot of work to do as a manager. All right, let's talk about peers. When you become a manager, you now have new peers, right? You probably have product managers that you're working with. Maybe you're working with marketing, or you're working with sales. And it's very important that you understand that those peer relationships are important, but they're complicated, right? A lot of product managers don't have direct reports, right? They have a big job. And so you're trying to do engineering work and you're doing people management stuff. And often your fellow product managers, they don't have to worry about the people stuff. So they're charging forward, trying to get work done. They're working on the roadmap. They're working on user interviews and all that. And then you have the engineering team. And often, and I want to single out product managers don't care about your people. I'm sorry. I mean, some do, at least a little bit, but often they're trying to get work done, right? They're trying to get the director of product or whoever's running the product function, they're making those people happy. Your engineers, all they want is to get stuff done. So as an engineering manager, I've often had clashes with product managers, because like I know the people stuff. Like I know what they're going through. I know that, wow, this person just had a death in the family and they're grieving right now. And I've shared that with product managers, and I'm not going to name names, but literally I've heard product managers say, I don't care, just make sure that they don't become a problem for me, right? I mean, I've seen cold-blooded product managers, not the majority, but enough to know that often they have motivations that don't align with your role as a people manager. So you have to understand it, you have to embrace it, and the best thing that you can do to mitigate that is high performance, right? You need to be shipping, you need to be deploying. If you have a team that is performant, that is the best defense against people that are interrogating what you're doing with that team. Because, I mean, right, shipping solves all problems, right? All right, I want to talk about a few things real quick, and I'm going to open up to questions for maybe 5 minutes. Documentation. Documentation is the lifeblood of management, right? And most engineers understand like documentation because we document our APIs, we document our code. But as a manager, whoever has the best documentation usually wins, right? So you want to make sure you're documenting the performance of your directs. I have just like directs, when I work with them, start like a personal brag document. I have my own document that has all my directs in it, and I regularly update that document with, wow, they did a good job with this, or, ugh, that was a miss. So that, again, from my perspective, when we get to the end of the year, I'm not trying to figure out what happened 12 months ago. I have my own living document of what happened, and that makes those performance conversations so much easier. It makes promotion conversations so much easier because I have a living document. That's critically important. You have to do the homework of documentation. That's so important. So document performance of your directs, document your one-on-ones. You have a document. I have a one-on-one document for all my directs that we update weekly when we meet. And that's super, super important, right? So I want to make sure that you lean into, especially for new managers, whatever documentation that your role has, lean into it. You should spend a lot of time updating the documentation. All right, the last thing that I'm going to say before I open up for questions. If you are a member of an underrepresented group and you're a manager, you will probably be the first type of that person that's managed them, right? So I'm an African-American man, right? I'm a black man from America, and that means that for most of the people that I've managed, I'm probably the first black person that's ever been their manager. And I bring that up because human nature is such that if we've never seen something before, we usually think it's weird, right? So like if we walked outside and we saw bottles of port falling from the sky, one, we would grab our glasses, but we would think, that's weird, right? And what's weird, we usually begin to be suspect of, we're suspicious of, right? So often if you are the first woman that's managed a person, the first black person, the first queer person, first whatever, even subconsciously, often people see that as a little bit weird, and that impacts how they respond to your management. So, and again, this is something that people don't say out loud. You have to be aware of that, right? And again, the best thing that you can do is excellent performance. I take my job very seriously. I do it at a high level because I know that being first, I can't be worst. I have to be like the very best manager this person has ever had because I know that I may be their first experience being managed by a black person. For a lot of people in America, I'm the first black person that's had any kind of power at all over them, right? And a lot of people, it's uncomfortable. I'm just going to be very honest with you. And I want to end with this. I've had many managers in my life. I've had several, obviously, white managers. I've had several women as my managers. I've had gay managers. I've had Asian managers. I have never had a black woman as a manager. I've seen very few black managers. So when I see them, I have immense compassion for them because I know that getting there was hard. So if you meet a black woman who's an engineering manager, please show some love because often they've had the hardest road into technology. So I want to end with that and end with this. Your career is not something that happens to you. You have agency. You can guide your career in the way you want it to go. All right, thank you so much. All right. Questions? What do y'all have? I don't know. Do we have like a roaming mic or? I just raise your hand if you have any questions. Yes, go ahead.
So I'm interested. You worked in really big places and you said you worked in some startup places. Do you think that large companies are fundamentally less efficient?
So the question is, I've worked at large companies and small companies. Yeah, are larger companies less efficient? In my experience, yes, because if you become a large company, like an Accenture, a multi-billion-dollar company, you've had to go through a lot of rigor and structure, and your legal framework is a lot more complicated. Your sales motions are more complicated, and you often don't have the luxury of building inefficiencies, right? Because your size is almost like a self-perpetuating machine, and you often have the luxury to focus on other things rather than are we more efficient. So I'm going to give that broad statement in that, yes, I think that the larger companies are less efficient, but it also varies by companies. Like if you have great engineering leaders who can cut through that, then I have seen those become really efficient. But often structure brings rigor mortis that slows and tightens companies up. So yeah, thanks for the question. All right, what else? You can raise. Okay, we have 2 questions. Can we get the mic to this gentleman up here? There. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you. My question is, you have been at small companies as well. How much of all of this applies to very small companies, like 10 or 20 people?
Okay.
Like startups and...
Yeah. So I think a lot of it applies. I will say that some of it that doesn't apply. So I talk about how if your manager had to cut half the team, they know who they would cut. If you have one person, you can't cut a person in half, right? So that doesn't apply. Even if you have like 3 people, right? Usually those 3 people are all essential. So at smaller companies, that part is different. But everything else about being human, being relational, 3 people, 30, 300, like that all applies. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'd have maybe one last question. Go ahead.
Have you ever been fired?
I've never been fired, no. I've been lucky. I fired people, I've never been fired. Not yet. I mean, GitHub, you might want to write Thomas, the CEO, and say, hey, this guy, Anjuan, did a great job. All right, thank you so much. I'm going to be around. I'm at Anjuan everywhere. This is my closing slide if you want to get my, these are my canned questions, so let me go through that. This is me. Follow me on Twitter, Threads, whatever. I'm happy to connect. Thank you so much.